welcome to our podcast today. Thank you for attending, for all of those people who are local in the United States and those that are around the world. We appreciate you participating today. Our podcast today is Mental Fitness in the Workplace and its effect on leadership at all levels. To clarify, when we talk about all levels, what we mean is you might be a leader of an organization, you could be a leader leading a team, you could be a participant in a project, and you need to show up. You need to lead the conversation, lead the discussion. You can be a leader as an individual contributor, or you could be a leader in an organization. And so when we're talking about mental fitness, we're talking about any situation you're in where you have to lead. So, welcome. We are joined here today with our colleagues, esteemed colleagues, Liz and Cara, and their bios and backgrounds are all in LinkedIn. So we want to make sure that you guys get to hear from them and see their backgrounds. Uh, Both Liz and Cara are trained in positive intelligence assessment and coaching. Both of them are coaches. And we're going to spend today talking about positive intelligence and what mental fitness and mental well-being is within the workplace. We want to understand what this profound impact of mental fitness means on leadership and how it shapes our work culture. Many of us today have significant challenges in work, in family, and we want to understand how we can combat that and use tools that are easily accessible to help us. And we know today that as industries and workplaces are evolving and more leaders are diverse across the world, across locations, they have to possess a resilience and an emotional intelligence today to navigate these challenges effectively. Uh, we're not talking about mental health. We're really focusing on mental fitness. And we're referring to our ability to have and maintain a strong mental well being. This is all about managing stress, having a positive mindset, even when we're faced with challenges and adversity suddenly crops up. So today we're going to talk about practical strategies for cultivating mental fitness and to learn how to become more effective and empathic leaders. So I want to learn from both Cara and Liz about how positive intelligence, or PQ, as you'll come to learn what that means, affects our life. What are you doing differently now, and how is that working for you? All of us, including myself, had to go through positive intelligence training in order to understand how it works. And both Liz and Cara took it further and then became coaches. So for me, it was a game changer. I was categorized as what's called a hyperachiever. I was always competitive. I was always very goal oriented. I always was a workaholic. But ultimately, what the assessment taught me was that I was covering up insecurities to create this positive image of being of striving to the top and wanting to be so successful. And those insecurities were holding me back to be a really good leader and be a better leader. And so I learned that this was my biggest, what PQ calls saboteur, getting in the way, or my blind spot, or what's holding me back to be a successful leader, and forced me to understand what that was, what those insecurities were, and how to deal with them, and come out on the other end, learning how to have a positive mindset. So let's hear from you, Liz. Tell us what you learned when you did your positive intelligence assessment.
Absolutely. Thanks, Cliff. And super excited to be here today with you and Cara, who is an excellent practitioner of this amazing tool. Um, to answer your question, I, like you, had a game changer moment as I started exploring PQ and learned about the ways my saboteurs were getting in my way. And we'll get into all that as we have our conversation today. But to simply answer your question, one thing I was not able to do before this program that I am able to do today is simply meditate. Um, just couldn't get my monkey mind to slow down enough. And what I loved about the program is it introduced more tactics than just breathing. So you're using all five senses. You're using your breath because breath's a great tool, but you're also using touch and you're using your sight,
Mm.
your hearing. And as I started to dial in more of my physical being, I was able to be a lot more present and to let some of this important work start to happen inside of me. So for me, the big game changer was that I was able to start to build some mental fitness muscle with meditation that then I can carry through with me at all sorts of moments.
Great. Excellent.
Great.
What about you, Kara?
Yeah, thanks for being here. And it's great to be on this panel with Liz, who I admire so much. When we start the 6-week program, we ask people to really identify a specific goal that they want to achieve, something that they want to drill down to. And mine was to wake up in the morning, or at least to spend Sundays and wake up in the morning not feeling overwhelmed by the day and not feeling depressed. And that's what that gave me. It gave me freedom so that I could wake up in the morning and not feel like that I'm bringing dread into the day, but to be able to wake up feeling neutral and be able to create my day. So I was much more present to the tasks and all of my work rather than feeling like, how is this day going to go? There are so many things that I really don't like about this work that I have to do. But it allowed me to just sort of take things in stride and really be able to be creative one moment at a time. And that was huge because it helped me to save so much time and energy that was better use elsewhere. The other
And you,
thing, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you hear a lot of people complain come Sunday. They're like, oh my God,
Right,
I've got to focus on the week. And I just really am not ready to do that.
right, exactly. And so these tools helped me to put things in perspective and to really reclaim that time and energy so that I wasn't being dragged through the day. And I think that's really where that slow slide to burnout occurs, in those small moments, in those small
Mhm.
ways that we are really pulled on.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing from both of you. I appreciate it. Um, we want to share with everyone a question about what would it be like, what would life be like if you could address what's holding you back? And we're going to talk about that today. And we're going to talk about action-oriented mindfulness. We're not talking about meditation, even though Liz did mention it in terms of the way we're going to address uh, positive intelligence and how we get there. But we're going to talk about putting mindfulness to work every single day, every single moment in the workplace and in our lives, whether you're at work or whether you're at home. So we want to hear from you. This is a really fascinating topic and really great conversation. We want to hear from you while we're going through the podcast. So please write your questions, or even just if you have a comment, it doesn't have to be a question. Maybe you've had an experience where you've done some mindfulness work and it's helped you, or what you've learned. We want to hear from you, and so everybody can see people's participation. So let's start off the conversation with Kara. Here's my first question.
Okay.
Obviously, people have been hearing about positive intelligence and PQ. So tell us what it is in one sentence,
One sentence. Okay. In a
if
nutshell,
possible.
yes. In a nutshell, positive intelligence is a mental fitness program and practice that gives people the tools to switch out of the negative thinking patterns that sabotage their health and well-being, their productivity and success, and their personal and professional relationships. It helps them to switch out of that part of the brain and into an area of the brain that is better there to serve them. So we recognize that our mind acts as both our enemy and our friend. And we want to be able to give people the tools to be able to manage stressors and challenges faster and easier so that they can make better decisions, so that they can cultivate healthier relationships and have much more productive conversations, and so that they can be more successful. The research has shown that only 20% of individuals in teams reach their true potential. And we believe that the reason why that number is so low is because of our mindset and all of the negative thinking patterns that we wind up being sabotaged and hijacked by. And so this practice and program is about helping people to develop in the moment tools and strategies to be able to turn that scenario around.
Mm-hmm. And let's just bring this very much to the practical side of it. My situation, where I described how I was a hyperachiever, my focus and what got in the way for me in a situation, even if I was an individual contributor in a team or just at a meeting, just a group meeting, I would be so focused on the results and being successful and getting to the end, I was not a very good listener. And it was very hard for me to hear, and we hear the comment, read the room. It was very hard for me to read the room because I was just so focused on getting to the end, being successful, having the team or the group um, achieve whatever they were achieving, that I didn't take the time to understand what was going on around me and hear what each person was saying. And the biggest criticism people would have of me was, "You're not a good listener," or "You don't hear." And I never understood what that meant until I was able to have the perspective of, okay, all you care about is winning, but everybody else in the room doesn't. So I'm sharing that as a way to get the practicalness out of what the program allows you to do.
I appreciate that. And I think well, I have a high hyperachiever as well. And I think a lot of people who are contract employees, and especially attorneys and things like that, and as a former performer, you either get the audition or you don't. You either win the case or you don't. So it's a very black and white win or lose world. And so hyperachievement is baked right into that pie. So it's very difficult to extract yourself and see then that a potential loss might not be a loss, but that there is a gift and opportunity in that scenario, and be able to develop that resilience to take those hits time and time again, because you're
Sure.
not going to be able to win everything. But what can you do with that experience as a result?
Great.
And I'd
Thanks
love
for
to add
sharing.
on to that conversation around kind of what you were saying earlier, Cara, around the difficulty of the day, like waking up without that dread, right? So, and follow on, Cliff, with what you were sharing about sort of that hyperachievement mindset. Today's corporate athlete, and that's not an uncommon term that we use, has to have endurance. And they go, from 7 to 5, back to back all day with very little opportunity to pause, and they're overwhelmed with context switching. So think about your scenario, Cliff, where you're getting the feedback that you're not listening. Well, you're back to back to back to back. You're not getting a moment to stop. What PQ can give us is some tactics to learn how to pause in the moment and ground ourselves. And so you can actually pause your brain and do a little better just in the moment listening. Become aware of what your physical sensations are telling you and use that as a tool to sort of stop that racing. And we need that in an environment where we're really jamming from, 8 to 5 or whatever it is. So from a practical perspective, what I would add to the conversation so far is some of these tools help us manage what is a reality, a difficult environment, and give us a way to pay attention to what we're doing and become more aware of it.
And you use this for your coaching. So when you're working with individuals who come to you and said, "Hey, I'm looking to improve my skill set, looking to improve my job, looking to improve how I can be a better leader or manager." They're coming to you with this intention to improve.
Mhm.
And the question I have for you is, why do you choose to use PQ or positive intelligence? There's a bunch of other tools that are out there that are available. Why are you using positive intelligence for your clients?
So, great question. There are many tools, and what I love about PQ specifically is that it has synthesized so much of the neuroscience research. I'm not going to get into all of that, but trust me, they've done the work to synthesize that research because there's been a lot that's gone on in the last 10 years, and have created a very simple framework that's easy for us to get our heads around. And the other piece, it provides the other reason I use it is it provides a ton of education and it reinforces with habits. And Cliff is a lifetime long learning professional, skill builder. You need a little bit of education, but you need a lot of practice. And so it puts all those pieces together in a really easy to use way that I haven't seen before. And I have my own personal experience. So to answer your question about, to sort of add on to that and talk about, with clients, mindset is the key. We're all, first of all, I have the pleasure of working with profoundly brilliant people, or really super smart people. And once they just pause and focus, they get really good stuff done. But mindset's the heart of so much of this. And so, I think it was Henry Ford who said, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. So this is a framework for us to help people notice where our brain is going, pay attention to that, and then make some changes so that we can get where we want to go. I just find the mindset, the research, the habits are the critical, essential elements that really make it powerful for the work I do with clients.
And then with regards to the mindset, I just want to make sure that folks who are listening and understand that it's not the mindset of a leader of an organization. It could
Mm.
be the mindset of anybody in any job that you have. Um, whether you're in a hospital or whether you're in food service industry or whether you're in manufacturing, it doesn't matter. These are skills. We all need a mindset and when we show up to work every day. And that's ultimately, I think, what you're suggesting is that understanding what that mindset needs to be.
Well, and to follow on that, Cliff, we all lead. We all lead from whatever position we have, whether it is literally the top of the org or if we're a contributing member on a team. There are moments where we have to step in and participate and influence. So leading is influence. So we're all leading in some capacity at some place. And sometimes we're just leading if we're trying to get our kids to put their sneakers on to go to school. You know what I mean?
Right.
We're all doing it in some way and shape. And so it's for that part of all of us.
Great.
Exactly. When people ask me, who is this for? Is this for CEOs? Is this for emerging leaders or supervisors? I say, yes. I say it's for humans. If you're human, it's for you.
Yeah.
Which is
Great.
true.
Excellent. So for you, Cara, when you're using PQ, what about it? What about positive intelligence makes it unique and impactful for your work as a professional coach, but also what's unique and impactful for the people you work with and actually learn how to use positive intelligence in their daily lives?
Yeah. So just to support and reiterate what Liz said, it all comes down to mindset. So for all of the other skill building and training and coaching that I've done in the past, it doesn't matter what the objective is. We all wind up, every single coaching session winds up addressing mindset on some level. And what I loved about this program when I discovered it was that it put together all of the things that I was interested in and learning about, but didn't quite know what to do with. It put it together in a way that works. So I'd read about positive psychology, but I didn't exactly know how to bring it into this moment and weave it into my life necessarily. I've read about neuroscience. That's fantastic, but what do I do with that? I was aware of performance science tools, and that would happen. That would be useful in certain situations. But how do I, again, weave it into the foundation of who I am and bring it into life in general? And I was aware of cognitive behavioral psychology and therapy, but I don't have time for therapy, and therapy never really worked for me anyway. So it brought all of these elements of science together and synthesized them into this brilliant program program, which allows you to really use them together. And it operationalizes strengths assessments, because you can't really use your strengths or even step into them if you're too busy being hijacked by stress. And it
Exactly.
helps to operationalize all of these other skills assessments tools, because it's really dealing with root level work that everybody can relate to. So it's taking the neuroscience and it's making it relatable. It's taking cognitive behavioral psychology and it's putting it into a much more simple framework that's easily accessible in the moment and recognizable in the moment. It's taking positive psychology and it's weaving it in throughout the day for us. So it's this beautiful program of this and that. And so that we are taking insight and we're moving into action. We are taking insight and we're able to create behavioral shifts over 6 to 8 weeks of repetitive work, which is where we start to see the gray matter in the brain change
Mhm.
and build the neuroplasticity, which is what is really needed. So without building neuroplasticity, you are a result of your own habits. All you
Mhm.
can do is repeat the same habits. So it isn't necessarily your fault if you keep falling into the same habits, negative thinking patterns. So we help you to build that neuroplasticity in small pieces over time consistently, being supported by a coach, and then continue to build that neuroplasticity and those skills over the course of a year or more, so that it becomes a way of life. It becomes a way of thinking. It becomes a community, so that you're not alone in it. I always rejected the idea that our mental health and our happiness wound up being reliant on mental health professionals to be able to fill in all the gaps for us. But if you didn't have the right kind of health insurance, or they didn't have the availability, you shouldn't have to wait for some sort of relief or
Right.
for a coaching session. So this helps you to build your own tools, and it's not as though it's a replacement for therapy or coaching. It's a yes and. So it helps you to build the in the moment tools and self command to be able to take back your own power,
Mhm.
basically. And so that's what I think is really brilliant about it. Shirzad's done this wonderful job of putting all those things together, where for me, they all hit kind of dead ends, and put it together in a way that really helps people change their own lives and saves relationships and helps people to be more successful and work together in those ways.
So the next question, pretty much is looking at what changes in behavior have you noticed? What results have you seen? It would be great to hear some specific examples from both of you. I'll start. I shared a little bit about mine, and I won't give away the whole story. Uh, but ultimately, when I'm in that situation where my super competitiveness comes out, I have now rewired my brain and I have learned how to trigger and look for when that's happening and then be able to change and shift. Before, I never was able to recognize it. I was never able to do anything about it. And when it was brought to my attention, I immediately became defensive and the conversation just went completely the other way. So now I'm able to say, okay, this is going to happen. I can see it coming. I see the signs. What do I need to do to prepare myself so that I can react to it appropriately? So I'll give you a small little example. Um, so I have children, and my son uh, he's going to school and he has a car. He lives in Salt Lake and he has a car in Salt Lake. And he is finishing up school and he came up with this idea of, oh, let's sell the car and I'll get a motorcycle or a scooter or something. And then I'll bring that back with me when I'm done with school. And without PQ, my immediate reaction would be, why are you talking about this now? What is, we need to be focusing on graduation. What does this have to do with anything? And that's how I would have handled it in the past, and the conversation would have just been a complete battle. And now, with my perspective, I'm able to say, this is an important thing to you, and I understand where you want to go with this, but this is the practical side of why we shouldn't do it. And that was a great conversation. But I saw it coming as he's describing. You know, your kids come to you and they're like, Dad, I got this great idea. I've been researching all these scooters, and this one's electric, and this is going to save us all this money. That's how I have been able to change my behavior.
So you became less reactive and more responsive, which is really what it comes down to.
And listened. I listened to what he really wanted.
And I would say the sage power, because that's, PQ talk there, which we'll get into later. The sage power you used is empathy. So you were also able to empathize with him and think about his excitement before you kind of jumped in with your own solve, right?
Can you share?
Bravo.
Liz, thank you. Can you share, Liz, an example with maybe a client or a client that you worked with that you were able to see how the saboteurs were getting in the way of them being successful, and the change that they went through to be able to, improve that or manage that more successfully?
Sure, I can jump in with a story, and then Cara, you can tell another tale.
Sure, go ahead.
But I have a client who, like you, Cliff, strong hyperachiever, and also super strong judge of herself, and has been able to use empathy to slow it down, to think about what the others are saying. And what she's also been able to do is use some of the PQ tactics, like she uses touch in a meeting to think about what she says next. And that little activity right then and there allows her to slow down. Her team even knows, and she's, as most great leaders are, is very transparent about how she's growing and where she's growing. And so they'll know that she's pausing to think. And that gives her a lot of license to be able to say what she says next, knowing that they believe that she's coming at it with pure goodness and is really exploring what the next thing should be, as opposed to telling them. So she has used the practice to sort of telegraph where she's trying to go and get some grace to go where she wants to go next and create a very authentic conversation. And it's a big game changer for her.
I think that's really helpful from the people she's leading, because when they're able to see that she's being transparent and being able to see that she's trying to do better by herself and better for the organization, and able to share her insecurities, or however you want to word it, they become much more engaged in working with her. And so in the future, when a challenge comes up and she brings it to the team and says, okay, we've got this big challenge, they're more on board and willing to help get it resolved.
She's being very vulnerable, and therefore she gets their full participation because it's very sincere and genuine, and they lean right in to solve. So It's a process, but I say kudos to her for putting it out there and for using her team as productively as she is, and entrusting them with her vulnerability.
Right. They're all working to help her become a better leader.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great.
I had a client who had a very difficult time collaborating with a team member, because this team member, she was described as an energy vampire and was very, very negative. And my client would just shut down, and it was very difficult to communicate or get anything done. So the program taught her to create some emotional boundaries around that and be able to look at her colleague as someone who had their own saboteurs and had their own challenges, but she was able to ground herself and not get caught up in the negative energy of her colleague, so she could be responsive rather than reactive and work together. So, and I think that this is important, because I think in HR, we have many people who have very strong empathy powers, but empathy you could become emotionally flooded very easily. And
Mhm.
so how do we create those emotional boundaries so that um, we are not dragged down by other people's toxicity or by difficult or energy vampires, but we're able to maintain our own sense of self and be able to let them have their stuff, and that we can continue to engage being without being knocked over by someone else's energy or a difficult personality. And I
Mm.
think that there are many of those people in the workplace. Difficult people are everywhere. So how do we make sure that we are not contributing to the problem by triggering them and they're triggering us back? And then this is what we call a dance of the saboteurs, but we're
Mhm.
able to maintain our own sense of self and be able to at least stop it from cycling in a negative direction.
You mentioned two words that I thought would be helpful to just, for those who are on the podcast, maybe don't understand what those two terms are, which is emotionally flooded. When you say emotionally flooded, can you give a description of it and maybe just, or an example so people can wrap their head around? So, or a couple of different examples from both of you.
Yeah. So empathy, I think, it has been categorized as being on three different levels. There's cognitive empathy, which is not being pulled into all the emotions of the individual. Then there's emotional empathy, which is feeling the feelings of someone else, and that becomes a dangerous place if we get stuck there, because we can shut down, we can stop thinking, we're loaded with stress.
Mm.
And then there is compassionate empathy, which is being able to create those boundaries around our own emotional senses and needs and be able to move into action. But emotional empathy is a place where people can lose their sense of self and they become a bit frozen.
So when you use the term emotionally flooded, give us an example of when somebody would become emotionally flooded.
When they are met with people, well, I mean, you take all of the problems that are in the world, right?
Mhm.
So all of the challenges, and be overwhelmed emotionally by problems and by challenges, whether it's people's problems, whether it's world problems, and then can become emotionally paralyzed, and you
So
stop sleeping. Yeah.
an example that we see in HR would be, an employee who um, easily shuts down or is not able to respond to a
Hmm.
Mhm.
supervisor who
Exactly.
could be uh, loud or could be speaking really fast or could be speaking in words that are above the understanding of the employee, and they just become so overwhelmed with emotion that they're not able to stop and
Stressed.
ask questions or
Yeah,
get through.
stressed.
They become stressed and they stop listening because they need to have something that protects them. They needed some protective barrier, and that winds up being, not listening anymore and not engaging. And that might be the employee that wants to stay home and not come into the office because they're not able to handle the personalities at work. And so that's one way to protect themselves.
And I think, Cliff, of your example earlier, where you were talking about, where you were so busy being focused on achieving and you weren't listening, you weren't hearing, you were probably in a place where you were emotionally flooded, focusing on the goal and
Mhm.
not able to hear what was being said because maybe you didn't want to hear it, you were overwhelmed, you shut it down. Like, I'm not ready to hear this right now.
Mhm.
Because that example is I thought, a really solid one of somebody who's like, not now, not dealing with that right now.
So I think just those two examples can describe emotionally flooded, meaning the employee example I gave was where somebody is doing something to the employee and they suddenly feel emotionally flooded. But my example was my focus was goal, success, project completion. I was emotionally flooded because I was shutting everybody out, or shutting out other emotions or perspectives or listening or all of that. So
Well,
that's interesting that there's two
yeah.
ways to think about it that way.
Well, and I think for hyperachievers, having a high hyperachiever myself, is that we can't handle the judgment that would come from not winning.
Yes.
So it's really about the judgment that we would perceive we're going to feel and get from other people. So if we can enter into empathy for ourselves, and empathy for self is one of the hardest things for leaders. Most people say, I have no problem empathizing, or I can much more easily empathize with other people, but I have a really difficult time empathizing with myself. And as long as we keep that hook in the body, that stress, that tension, that shame and that guilt and all of that other stuff, we are in our own way, but then we're also in the way of progress. So, developing empathy as a leader is a really, really important tool, but we call it a muscle because it takes practice.
Mhm.
But empathy for self and empathy for others, empathy in general is the gift that you give yourself.
Mhm.
So, being able to soften the ground and soften that tension then allows you to be able to think better. Think more clearly and be more responsive rather than reactive. But as long as you hold on to that tension and you can empathize with yourself because you're so caught up in the potential judgment that could occur if you don't win,
Mhm.
then you are in the way of progress all the way around.
And what do you when you talk about empathy and individuals learning about empathy? What are you thinking, or what are people learning about empathy at home or at work or things like that? How's that coming to? Can you give some examples of how that happens?
Liz, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think um, the question, Cliff, if I'm hearing it right, is how do we see empathy showing up in the
Yeah.
work that people are doing?
Yes.
Well, I think we talked a little bit about empathy of self and how challenging that is. I think usually if you see somebody who's having a really hard time with others, they're judging others, they're harsh on others, they're judging
Mhm.
harsh on circumstances, which is another really big piece. It's usually a sign that they're really harsh on themselves.
Mhm.
So I think it's an indicator. And when you can start to dial it up, you can start to bring in all the other powers that we're talking about.
What
So I'm
do
not sure I'm answering your question, but
well, my second part of my question is, what does the science say about why leaders struggle with being empathetic?
well, I think it goes back to exactly what Kara was saying, which is that they're harsh on themselves. So usually it's inside first, and then it goes outside. So they have high standards for themselves. And I think what I would love to do is sort of answer the question with a little bit of a spin and talk about the concept of saboteur, which we're not going to get into a lot of detail. But the idea is a saboteur is, you mentioned hyperachiever. That's saboteur mindset. These things came from a good place. You used that tool somewhere in your life to succeed somewhere. It was a very valuable tool for you at some point. We all have them. And they give us the ability to get something that was done that was really important. The problem is maybe holding on to it a little too long in the wrong place. We over rely on the strength, is the way, not said another way. So when we over rely on things that we did well at one point and don't give it up and let it make space for some new place, then we can kind of get stuck and we can kind of we use it as almost a security blanket. So that I think is an important part of this conversation, that these things have their place and they're good. They're not bad habits. They're not like, oh, you got to stop doing that. You just have to stop doing it as much and all the time.
Mhm.
Is really what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's an important point to make in that achievement is great, but hyperachievement is when we take that strength and it goes too far and we stop, we don't listen, and that has negative consequences. So all of these sabotaging thoughts and behaviors come from a particular strength. And if we can recognize where that line is, and it's usually through the quality of the emotion, any kind of negative energy, then we can stop, take the pause, and step back behind the line back into the strength. Because there's nothing wrong with achievement. Achievement's wonderful. But I think because the United States in particular, I can only speak for my own country, we are so achievement oriented.
Mhm.
And that I think makes it difficult for us to empathize with self. But when we can, and we're able to create that pause and enter into empathy, that's the inflection point where all inequity can be challenged and all equity can be created.
Mhm.
And it's a really hard thing to do, especially when we think we shouldn't have to give any a particular person or behavior empathy. But that's why we call it a muscle. That's why we call it mental muscle, because you
Mm.
don't have to agree with them and you don't have to agree with their behavior. But if you can enter into empathy in some level, that starts to turn the tide into creative problem solving and much more healthy discussion and problem solving. And that's why it's really, really important. But as long as you hold on to that stress and that tension and that hook in the body, everything is sabotaged and will stay that way. That's why I say
So,
empathy is the gift you give yourself.
so let's just shift the conversation a little bit to the leadership of the organization. So we've talked about how PQ can help you as an individual become a better leader in whatever you're doing. But now for leaders of organizations who are on the podcast listening, how does positive intelligence impact the leadership of the organization? Where do changes occur?
So, if you want to be a leader, leaders need to have people who want to follow them. So, if nobody wants to follow you, then it's kind of
Yeah,
hard to
you're a
lead.
lonely leader.
Exactly. So where positive intelligence helps is that it is enabling people to move to shift away from authority-based leadership to
Mm,
inspiration-based leadership, where they can influence employees towards a collective outcome. And when we talk about the four pillars of leadership, which begins with triple purpose, so when we can align together how what we're doing has a positive impact on others outside the organization, has a positive impact on the team members within an organization, and it
right.
also invites us to think about what positive impact is this job and this work having on me in particular. Being able to align those purposes and communicate them builds earned trust, and that's where psychological safety
Hmm.
can happen and be realized. And once you have earned trust, then that leads to healthy conflict. Now you're not avoiding difficult conversations, but everybody is listening to each other and you can get some stuff done. And
Hmm.
then if you can talk about challenging things and you have that healthy conflict, that leads to mutual accountability. So how do we hold each other accountable and be able to have our ears open to doing that so that we are all working towards the result that we want with the behaviors that are desirable? And that's those four pillars help to create a really healthy culture, but it needs to be modeled and it needs to be signaled and communicated by leadership. And so
Hmm.
that's what I mean about leading with inspiration and influence rather than leading by authority, which is not likely to have many followers, and you'll have high turnover as a result.
Mm.
I keep hearing from people who leave companies, why did you leave the company? Well, I want to find a company that's more aligned with my values. I mean, it's just cut and paste. That answer keeps coming up time and time again.
Right. And I think we just, as a leader, if you're uh, aspiring to be a leader and a leader of an organization or a leader of a division or have a big leadership role, we generally have learned leadership just through our upbringing that leadership is authoritative and never really learned that there maybe was another way to be a leader by inspiration.
And I would build off of that, Cliff, and what Kara has said is another way, leaders show up and can do this is simply by modeling. To your point, depending on generation, you've had all different generations of leadership styles that you've um, absorbed by osmosis. Current leaders have an opportunity to model what they want to get from the organization, what they want others to do. And so they can really model finding the gift and opportunity in some of the challenges that come up and how to empathize and how to use all these powers of exploring and navigating the complexity and really leaning in the way that example that I gave earlier.
So, what are some of your clients saying, Liz? Want to share
Can I
some
read a quote?
quotes, some thoughts, some comments? What do you want to say?
Well, I can read a quote that I got from one of my clients that I just thought was, an example of a lot of what we've talked about so far. Um,
Definitely.
this client said, I've discovered that my judge is mostly hypercritical of me, but presents itself in a lot of comparisons to those around me. So that comparison piece. Other moms who have time and ability to go to school functions, other families who plan more activities for them to do on the weekends. coworkers who seem to float through everything with less stress. I've gotten much better at labeling the judge as it shows up throughout the day. And by the end of the weekend, I noticed and labeled it better and more often. And also, as I did visualizations, which was in the app, I realized that I was much harder on myself than others are.
Mm-hmm.
And I simply didn't need to be. Also, I have improved at handling situations with empathy, creativity, and being solution oriented much more quickly than before. So as she's going through these activities, she's seeing the results and the progress. And I thought that was pretty powerful.
Absolutely. And just give us a little bit of context in terms of the role that this person had in an organization and all the different challenges that they were having to deal with.
So this is a person who's leading a large marketing organization. And
A division of a company or a marketing company?
A large marketing organization inside a company, in-house.
Wow. Yeah. So lots. So that was very insightful for.
Yeah, really actively using it and actively seeing the results and modeling it with her people. So pretty powerful stuff.
Super. Great. All right. So we're almost at close time here. So I want to share. We all want to share some follow up on our conversation today. This has been great, a great topic, and thanks you guys for sharing all of the stuff that you've been sharing. Next month, which is August, is National Wellness Month. Coincidentally, we had the podcast and didn't pay attention to what was happening next month, but coincidentally, it's National Wellness Month. So we're inviting you to join our cohort of individuals who want to work on their mental fitness. We are doing this in two ways. The first way is that we are offering an overview workshop. Today was a taste just to get you introduced to what positive intelligence is. And our overview workshop will help you understand where the negative thinking is coming from, how it's getting in the way, and how to address it. The idea is that you're going to learn how to access more productive and positive parts of your brain. We'll cover tools and tactics to use right there and then, every day, all the time. And you'll be able to access these tools on an ongoing basis. We really want to just focus on giving you simple tools, frameworks to immediately turn you from somebody who's having difficulty to somebody who's being successful. So our program, our overview workshop, involves an assessment, which we'll share with everybody after the program. And after you take the assessment, you will be able to see very clearly what are your saboteurs, what's getting in the way, and understand what each of those are. And then in the program, you'll learn what's needed to work on and get those addressed. We're offering that overview workshop on two different dates. The first date is August 10th at noon, and it's going to be an hour long. And Liz is going to run that workshop. On August 17th, Cara is going to run that workshop, and that's going to be at 8 a.m. We will send around all the details after the program, and we hope people will sign up and participate with our cohort. Then, after you participated in the overview workshop, we have our Positive Intelligence Boot Camp, which is a 7-week program that meets weekly with your coach, either Cara or Liz, and you're with your team, and you're also hearing their feedback and learning from them. And you're able to participate in 3 one-on-one sessions of your choosing. And so that's something very valuable, very powerful to take you through the 7-week program, which I did and was able to rebuild my mental muscles. So we're offering that program as well. And we haven't specifically picked a date of when we're going to do that, but that will be probably closer towards the end of August, beginning of September. So we're at the end of our program now. Want to open it up to anybody who has any questions that they might want to share in the chat. Ask the experts based on the stuff that we talked about today. If anybody would like to share, if not, we're going to bring the program to an end. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Cara, for sharing your insights and your expertise. I hope everybody today enjoyed and learned a lot about mental fitness in the workplace and its effects on leadership at all levels. Have a great day.